there's a lot of talk how important the ocean is, but there's actually very little financing that goes to protecting the ocean. And instead, there's a lot of harmful subsidies that are put forward towards the ocean.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. From June 9th to 13th, some 15,000 participants, including more than 60 heads of state and government, convened in Nice on France's Mediterranean coast for a major UN-sponsored conference on oceans. So what happened at the UN Ocean Summit and why does it matter? Joining me to answer these questions and more is Bruna Campos of the Center for International Environmental Law. We caught up last week as the conference was coming to a close, and in our conversation, Bruna Campos explains why this summit was convened in the first place, what governments are pushing for more robust protections of our oceans, and what governments are standing in the way. The UN Oceans Summit was a major international environmental conference that didn't really get too much attention in more mainstream outlets. So I thought it might be a good idea to devote an entire episode to explaining what happened at this conference and why it matters. If you appreciate these kinds of episodes that shine a spotlight on undercovered global stories, I hope that you support the show in kind. Please go to globaldispatches.org where you can sign up for the newsletter and get a paid subscription to the newsletter and to this podcast and help me keep doing what I do. I appreciate it. Thank you. Now, here is my conversation with Bruna Campos of the Center for International Environmental Law. You are in Nice, France right now for the major UN Oceans Summit. And I wanted to focus the conversation today on what's happening at this UN Ocean Conference. It really is like a major environmental conference. It's been on the international diplomatic calendar for years. It's not getting like a whole lot of attention in more mainstream press. So I want to just take this opportunity to learn from you what's happening at this conference. What are some of the big debates, big issues? What can be accomplished at this conference? And what are kind of the big issues going forward? But before we get there, can I just have you set the context a little bit? Why is this conference happening in the first place?
So the UN Ocean Conference, which I will sometimes refer to as UNOC, is grounded in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goal 14, which is about conserving and sustainably using the ocean by 2030. So it's not a convention. It's not like the Rio conventions where you have, convention on biological diversity or climate change, but it is a space where we can just debate some of the main issues that are facing the oceans in a sense. So at this point, reaching that goal, so the conserving and sustainably using the ocean by 2030, it's a stake because the ocean is currently facing a triple planetary crisis. So climate change, biodiversity loss, and toxic pollution. And I think delegates here are very much aware of that. I don't think it's a contentious issue. I think everyone knows that there is a crisis. And the idea of the UN Ocean Conference is to accelerate action and mobilize all actors to conserve and sustainably use the ocean, so be able to actually face those challenges.
So who's attending this conference? Is it kind of a mix of civil society, scientists, and government officials?
Because this is being held on the basis of the UN General Assembly. So they're the ones who have actually given the okay to have this conference. So let's say the most important ones are the delegates of every government recognized by the UN. And then there is obviously civil society is quite present. And then you also have a lot of scientists, a lot of researchers who are also here to present research. But there's also, obviously, like in many other types of conventions, you see a lot of also like lobbyists that are also using this space.
So what's happening? Like, what's on the agenda? Like, walk me through the key points of this conference.
The conference has actually 10 main themes called 10 Ocean Action Panels, where key themes will include things like protecting marine and coastal ecosystems, preventing marine pollution, leveraging the interlinkages between the ocean, biodiversity, and climate change, which is one that we are really focusing on because it's the one that we can talk about the phase out of fossil fuels, not just also promoting food security, implementing international law, specifically the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which you would think this conference is about that, but it's actually not. Every UN country is a signatory to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea.
And so all of these issues are up for discussion. My understanding as well is that conveners are using it as an opportunity to spur more ratifications for the High Seas Treaty. Can you explain a little bit, like, what is the High Seas Treaty and why is this conference a particularly important moment to generate momentum towards ratification?
So the conference is not an actual space where you actually get something legally binding. So it's actually a space where you can push for other issues to be brought forward. So there will be an actual political declaration at the end of the conference, together with many other points, summary report of the ocean action panels. And so one of the key aspects of this conference is to actually push other topics that are particularly important. And so the High Seas Treaty, or it has a longer name and it can often be referred to as the BBNJ, is a treaty that allows governments to agree on setting a governance framework, a way for all the governments to agree how to manage outside national jurisdiction. So at the moment, it's very much everyone does whatever they want, which is not a very sustainable way of protecting the oceans. So the idea is that governments will come together. So they have us, there's sufficient signatories. So I think at the moment there's 120 signatories that have signed it. But in order for it to come into force, you need to have at least 60 that ratify it in national law. And so here is where the moment where governments are basically stating we have finally ratified on the national law. And so it's a way to also push for the ones that haven't. So that way you can come out and say, we finally have ratification of this really important treaty that has taken years to be negotiated. I think it took more than 10 years to actually negotiate the High Seas Treaty.
But it hasn't reached that 60 country ratification threshold yet. But my understanding is the fact that this conference is happening now is kind of like a forcing mechanism for, several new countries to deposit their instruments of ratification. So that's like one concrete outcome from this conference. You mentioned that this conference is not part of like a broader UN treaty process or anything like that. It's not like the COPs or those kind of UN very regulated treaty process, but there is like a political outcome, a political declaration. And it's my understanding that governments and delegates are negotiating it and trying to decide what is to be included in it. What are some of the sticking points? And I should note, my understanding is the United States is not participating in this. Is that correct?
No, my understanding is also they're not here. But one of the sticking points of debate, so one of the things that we've been massively pushing within the political declaration is the inclusion of the phase out of fossil fuels within the text. Now, the political declaration has become very weak, so it is actually negotiated ahead of the conference. And so this has already happened before delegates have arrived. They've negotiated, and all they will actually do here is adopt it. So unless a country breaks silence. But right now, no one has broken silence. So we therefore assume that the final draft that has been shared is available online. That text is to be adopted Friday, so tomorrow. But unfortunately, it misses on being a strong declaration. It's very weak, for example, on things like calling out the main challenges of the triple planetary crisis. It doesn't refer to fossil fuels when it mentions the advisory opinion of the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. So it blows opinion. It doesn't refer to what it was actually giving an opinion on. So the really important part that greenhouse gas emissions are actually marine pollutants. It really misses on language related to precautionary approach. It does do something positive, which is referred to Indigenous people and the importance of the Indigenous people and their rights, and also for free, prior, and informed consent. But apart from that, it's just very weak in actually being a declaration that takes concrete action where we really see, okay, for the next couple of years, governments will take these actions to change the current situation of the ocean, because we all know the ocean is currently very unhealthy.
If you have this weak political declaration, you have like the non participation of the United States and presumably some other key players as well. Like, what difference do you suspect this conference will make? Will it have any meaningful impact on ocean health going forward?
Yeah, I think every country can do its bit to ensure that the ocean is healthy. So, in a sense, phasing out fossil fuels is something that really needs to be tackled at a national level. So, every country can take the decision to ban offshore oil and gas within national legislation and commit to that. And so, it's not because not everyone is at the table that it will stop them from taking action. It's actually every country can take action to define what's the best course for actually having that phase out, because obviously it's not going to be the same for every country. So, in a sense, this is a space where countries can come and commit to that. It's a space where they can define how they're going to, for example, ensure effectiveness of the marine protected areas, which at the moment, a lot of the times, they're just polygons on a map. There's no actual real effective management of protected areas. And so, this is a space where they can say, we've decided that not just are we going to declare this area as a protected area, but we also will be declaring this area as a place where we're not going to do certain types of activities like offshore oil and gas. Or they can say, like, we currently have 30% of our area is protected, and we've decided to close all the offshore oil and gas production that we have in those areas as a start to the phase out, because it's a gradual phase out. And this is the kind of commitment that every country can do here to show how they're actually moving themselves, how they're putting their own commitments within the whole way of conserving and managing the oceans. So it's not about, oh, someone's missing, and so, them missing means that we're not going to be able to achieve it. No, it's the community. So everyone has to do their part.
So, having covered conferences like this for many years, in which there is an issue at hand, there's civil society organizations like yours that are pushing for maybe more ambitious outcomes. And then there are certain governments that are blocking ambition to those outcomes. There's, tends to be, and it sounds simplistic to say this, like good guys and bad guys. So, which governments are the ones that are putting the brakes on more ambitious and robust policies to try to protect oceans? And which governments are at the fore of higher ambition outcomes here?
So I would say the positive countries, I like to start with positivity. So the Pacific small islands, developing states are definitely the ones that are putting themselves out there. I think six Pacific SIDS have actually ratified here in Nice the High Seas Treaty. So that's one thing. But there are also the ones, for example, that are really calling out for a phase out of fossil fuels. So they put themselves out there. They speak about it. They go to every speech that they make. They link it back to the root cause of the triple planetary crisis. And they say we really need to achieve that if we're really going to become sustainable. So I would say there is a lot of governments within that part of the world that are really pushing in the right direction and should be heard, because in a sense they're the frontline communities that are facing crisis. Sea level rise is a big issue for Pacific Island states. So in a sense, they're the ones who maybe in the future don't even have a place to call home because their land has been taken over by the sea.
It is those small island states that tend to be the ones that have most at stake in high ambition outcomes. And so they're the ones pushing for it for the reasons that you described. On the other side of the ledger, though, there are countries who try to block progress. And now here it's just notable that if the US were participating, it's probably safe to assume that they would, at least under this current administration, not want a robust outcome. But the US is not in the room. So what countries are those that, as you described it earlier, were most responsible for a weaker political outcome document?
So, in a sense, what we noticed for the political declaration was that there were also other countries that were actually pushing in the right direction. And interestingly enough, for example, the European Union was asking for a phase out of fossil fuels within text. So that's a positive mention. And Brazil has also recognized in its opening speech that phasing out fossil fuels is important for saving the oceans. And have also started a blue NDC challenge, the NDCs being the plans that governments need to actually adopt to define how they're going to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, under the
So
Paris Agreement. Yeah.
they've actually stated that phasing out offshore oil and gas, or within that challenge, phasing out offshore oil and gas is a way to actually be able to contribute to that reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a big step for Brazil. Unfortunately, they didn't themselves commit to that. They just asked other countries to do it, which is a bit unfortunate because at the moment we're seeing, Brazil has had, there's been a big uproar right now for the equatorial margin where they're wanting to start new drilling. And you have indigenous communities that are very much standing up against it. I've been working this past week together with two women from the Amazon who have come all the way here to basically push governments to explain to other governments, not obviously not just Brazil, because Brazil definitely knows what they're doing, but to explain to other delegates what kind of impact that would have to their communities, because they live on the coast, what that would have that to their communities if Brazil actually goes forward and starts drilling next to the Amazon. So the ones that are not doing so great and they're blocking. So we do know there's the typical countries that didn't like the wording related to fossil fuels. And it was countries like Russia didn't like it. Egypt didn't like it either. Basically, the countries who actually produce oil and gas were very much not wanting to see text related to fossil fuels. And that's quite problematic. And you also see that the ones who usually are quite also problematic to other language, more powerful language around protecting indigenous communities in this kind of situation, or also something like having stronger text on the plastics treaty or having stronger text on precautionary principle. So it's usually very similar countries. It doesn't really change that much. And that's kind of unfortunate. And I think this is where it's the responsibility of countries who are actually emitting and or who are causing most of these problems. And when I say the problems, is not just from fossil fuels, but it can also be from plastics or fishing, because bottom trawling in general has been a big topic. Deep sea mining has been a big topic as well. And it's usually the same countries who want to go out and do those extractive activities. And it's the responsibilities of countries who understand what type of impact that has and to actually say, we don't want to do those activities. And I say this because most of European countries actually already ban offshore oil and gas, very interestingly. But they do actually still have companies from their countries that go out into other waters and drill in those waters and cause problems in those waters. So it's kind of still like a colonial part of sort of, we'll just take our problems to somewhere else and we're going to benefit from someone else's problem.
So, lastly, say a year from now, how will you know and what will you be monitoring to suggest whether or not this conference did make a meaningful impact in terms of promoting ocean health?
So, for sure, other spaces where legally binding policy can actually be made is where we'll be looking to see a difference. So, as I said, the NDC's COP30, so in Belém, in Brazil, will be a place where we're going to be able to analyze the commitments that governments have made to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. The EU has still yet to set out its plan, its NDCs. And so we're really hoping they have a strong plan, and we're hearing a little bit of a rumors that France is putting its feet down and not wanting to actually for that plan to be ambitious. So there are sort of within the European Union, there's obviously its own dynamics. So we're really hoping that countries like France and Germany are the ones who are taking ambition, given that they're the ones who actually are causing a lot of the problems elsewhere. So in a year's time, COP30, those plans will be important, but there's also a lot of conversation on biodiversity itself. And as we are also reaching for for defining plans for reducing biodiversity loss, it will be also really important to understand how governments are linking the loss of biodiversity at sea to specific impacts and what they're actually doing, concrete actions. And then the lastly is the financing, how they're actually putting the money behind what they're saying they will actually do. Because in the end, no action will take place if you don't actually put the financing behind it. And interestingly enough, the oceans, the SDG 14 is the least financed of the SDGs. So there's a lot of talk how important the ocean is, but there's actually very little financing that goes to protecting the ocean. And instead, there's a lot of harmful subsidies that are put forward towards the ocean.
Bruna, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. I'm glad we're able to shine a bit of a spotlight on this undercovered topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.